Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. I hope you guys have had a lovely weekend. We are back after 1% of videos done, and hopefully 99% later, I can finally leave this room. We're going to start this Monday off with Eriette of the Charmed Apple Auras. This is the first draft of a deck from Matt, who has supported the channel in a lot of ways, honestly, and I'm very happy to be seeing this deck, as him and I have been talking about how to build Eriette, and so he has brought forward this first draft. I think it's going to be fun to take a look at. As always, our deck list we're about to look at is in the video description below. Eriette is a new commander, and it's always good to see different drafts of how you would run her. And here, I think, is a pretty good first draft. And while you're in the video description below, you might see a little link to a form where you could submit your own decks for me to look at. And if you'd also like to support the channel and bring your deck to the next one I look at, there's a link for that in the video description below. Well, as we have Eriette on the middle of the screen, let's talk about her and what she brings to auras before we go into the deck list proper. Eriette of the Charmed Apple is one of our witches from the new Eldraine set. She is a human warlock in Orzhov colors at 3 mana, so that's white and black. She's a 2/4, which is pretty good for a 3-drop. And she's got 2 lines of text we care about. The first one that says, each creature that's enchanted by an aura you control can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. And then at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of auras you control. So pretty straightforwardly, this is a aura, like tribal, if you may, commander, where the entire purpose is we're going to throw auras, but specifically on our opponent's creatures. Now, traditionally, this has been kind of a tough thing to build around, because when you put an aura on your opponent's creatures and that aura is removed one way or another, the creature kind of stays in play. Usually we just want to remove our opponent's creatures, and so we don't have to worry about the aura getting removed or anything else that kind of interacts with it. Even more, if we get removed from the game, all of those auras stop existing and those creatures regain their abilities to attack, which usually isn't a problem for us because we've just been knocked out of the game, but it's interesting to note. Well, Eriette has 2 kind of setups to help this. One, with that first line of text, every one of our aura has basically an entire additional line, which is that those enchanted creatures can't attack us. And I think that's really good. And this kind of incentivizes us to play less, let's say, defensive auras, like auras that would have that effect already, like Arrest or Pacify, or I guess it would be Passivism, or cards like that that prevent attacks. But it also kind of leans us towards aggressive enchantments that give benefits to our opponent's creatures, because now if they attack other players. It also lets them all be defensive abilities, so that's really good. It also kind of makes us not put a bunch of auras onto one creature. We don't want to stack, we want to spread them out. Because once you put 2 auras on one creature, it kind of loses that text a little bit. Then the other ability gives us a clock. For each aura we have in play, we are draining the entire table. And at end step, which is really nice, so it triggers very quickly. Honestly, all in all, this is a very strong commander. And kind of why I'm excited to be talking about this draft is because I am working on my own draft, and I'm kind of do it by working on this draft. This is one of my favorite things about the channel, is that, by helping a deck, I am building my own deck. So let's look at the deck proper, and let's see what kind of choices are in here. And I'm going to say, if you haven't taken a look, as I said before, I really recommend taking a look yourself. This deck is really, really well built. There's a few things I want to point out, but as a whole, we've got a pretty good system here. We've got our commander, we've got a low amount of creatures, but I would say still a decent amount of creatures that kind of support our aura plan. Very few of them are meant to be winning setups in and of themselves. Then we've got some support in sorceries and instants. We have a few amount of artifacts, we'll probably get back to that. And then we have 42 enchantments. That's a lot of enchantments, and we will get back to them in a second, but you can tell immediately this is where the crux and the power of the deck lies, is by using these enchantments like in ways that are very good, political, and put us ahead. Then if you notice in the lands, we've got 16, 15, so 31 basics. I think that's just because this is a first draft and we shouldn't worry too much about that. Now, before we go any further, we're going to do the thing we always do, which is we're going to go down and take a look at the curve. And this curve is a little tricky. We have a lot of 3 mana spells in the deck, and our commander is 3 mana herself. This is a little tricky. This is tricky for a number of reasons. Primarily, first of all, because a lot of the cards we want to play are at 3 mana. There's not really a way we're going to get around that, unfortunately. I think we're going to have to do is cut down on them, and that's what we're going to do in the first half of this video, is I'm going to go through the options here that have been selected, and we're going to look at them in a bit of a critical eye. Then we're going to do a bit of a quick check for the other cards outside of 3 mana, and then we're going to go into additions or suggestions that I have. As mentioned before, we're generally trying to find a way to reduce the cost, the 3 mana cards in the deck. And the reason is, this deck really does rely on our commander to function. A bunch of auras all over our opponent's creatures only will get us so far when Eriette of the Charmed Apple is not in play. The first reason is that her first line of text doesn't work when she's not on the battlefield, so if you spent effort improving or enchanting your opponent's creatures, and then all of a sudden Eriette's off the battlefield, well, we're kind of in a tough situation because now all of those creatures can swing back at us, which I would suggest sometimes they're going to be very excited to do so. Another thing to note is when she's not on the battlefield, we don't have a clock. In really good setups where we can have 4 or 5 auras out, what I would consider the mid-game of this deck, we're draining the entire table for 5 and we're gaining 5. So it's not necessarily a drain, it's more like each opponent loses 5 life and we gain 5 life, which is pretty good. It's a pretty good swing, and that's not including the soft power of our opponent's creatures attacking each other. But once again, once Eriette's off the field, none of that happens. So her being 3 mana and everything being 3 mana is a little tricky. So we're going to find where we can work on this. Now, a lot of our 3 mana cards are our enchantments, and we're going to take a look there. Sorry, I said enchantments, but our creatures. And then enchantments. And I have a different solution for enchantments, which when we get to them. But first, let's start off by looking at our 3 mana creatures and see which ones we can keep and which ones we can drop. And I think partially this is a first draft, so I understand why some cards are here as a first draft, but there's definitely some suspicious inclusions, as the kids might say. So Arden, Intrepid Archaeologist, is a really interesting curse-built legendary creature. I say curse because what it does is, at the beginning of combat, you could attach any number of... Oh, I thought it was all auras. I thought you didn't have a choice. Okay, you do have a choice. So what Arden does is, at the beginning of combat, you may attach any number of auras equipment you control to target permanent or player. Now, what's cool about Arden is traditionally the way you use him is either you go with the Voltron style build where you use Arden's ability to put all of your auras and equipment onto one creature and attack with it, or you use it, as I prefer, in a curse style build where you can lay out a bunch of curses, and then with Arden, each turn, you reattach all those curses to one player to put them behind as they grow in strength. However, this is an interesting card in Eriette. And the reason is that what we want is kind of the opposite of what this creature gives. Arden allows us to stack auras onto one target, whereas we want to spread out our auras over a large amount of targets. So, though I do like his ability to basically put an aura somewhere else when you don't feel that it's doing its job somewhere, I don't know how strong it's going to be, because there's going to be a lot of situations that I'm foreseeing that, you know, each of your opponents have one or two creatures, and you have one aura on each of them, right? And ideally, right? And then someone else plays a creature that is really strong, and you want to re-equip an aura, like, you know, shift an aura onto it. We're only shifting the one aura, right? It's unlikely we want to shift two auras onto that creature, because then we're losing a bit of the text that makes it so strong, right? Eriette's first text doesn't stack, so two auras on a creature doesn't make it attack you even less, it just does the same thing. And since her second ability just counts auras, we're not incentivized to stack them onto something. Now, it has a few kind of choice, you know, combos, like with, where are we? Core Spirit Dancer, where you can stack a bunch of auras onto Core Spirit Dancer and go attack for lethal. But I think that's a rare kind of setup, and I think we're just going to be happier removing Arden. All right, going forward, Auramancer, that returns an enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. I don't really have a problem with this. My problem is that it's 3 mana. Is there another way to have this ability? Because I think if you can get this ability at 2 mana, you would be really, really happy. And I don't know. Let's see. I haven't actually found anything. Let's see. Return target enchantment card graveyard from your graveyard. Let's see what we have in white and black for this option, because the ability is good, the mana cost ain't great. So let's put mana value. Well, there we go. We can get it as low as 1 mana at instant speed. And I think I'm just inclined to say that instead, because I don't think we're running that card anyways. We're not. And it's not like we can blink our creatures. We do have Sun Titan that brings Auramancer back. And if that's the case, if we want that combo, Tragic Poet or Restoration Specialist, both of those are more interesting to me. Neither of them are sorcery speed, but Tragic Poet is probably a little better, though it takes longer, and Restoration Specialist is 3 mana to activate right away. I would either go Restoration Specialist or Argivian Find. This guy has dug up an enchantment. And with that in mind, either of those, just because it's not a 3 mana, I do particularly like it. And I'm sure if we wanted, we could go higher mana, but I don't think I want to do that. So I think I would just replace that with something else. Brina. Wow, what a fantastic legendary bird. I'm a big fan. But am I a big fan here? So I'm going to put Brina and Gix in kind of the same category, where they are 3 mana combat-oriented legendary creatures. Brina, of course, allows your opponents, plays the political game off your opponents to grow your creatures, and then when you play the political game yourself of attacking the right people, you'll draw cards. And Gix says whenever a creature deals combat, you'll lose a life and draw a card, and this includes your opponents. Of course, the damage has to go to your opponents and not to you. So my problem is both of these strategies heavily benefit just a more creature-based black-white deck. And that's why I don't think they really belong here. I think for card draw, we're just going to have better options. I'm going to suggest something else. And when it comes to kind of politics, well, you don't really need these politics. Your commander already provides those kind of politics. Gix is just going to draw your opponents way more cards than it's going to draw you, and it's going to be really, really hard to catch up to that. It might cause your opponents to squabble with each other, but I don't know if necessarily that's the effect you're going to want. Brina, likewise, is definitely going to draw your opponents more cards than you because you just don't have enough creatures to kind of get away with it. I do like its ability to grow our commander or Brina herself, and that is something that the deck is already lacking, is a way to make Eriette very, very large, which makes her attacker. But at the same time, it's not really what you want to do. Eriette is already a threat in and of herself, and we don't really need a different way to kind of change her to make her a combat threat. So both of these cards kind of stick out of me of cards I don't want. All right, Daxos the Returned. Once again, another really cool enchantment-based commander, but I just don't think this is where he belongs. He doesn't do anything by himself when he comes out. You need to cast your auras to get experience counters, and then after which you need to use his ability to make the creatures that are affected by the experience counters. That's a lot of hoops to jump through in a deck that can't easily bring Daxos back. We have a few options, but we don't have an infinite amount of options. And so this feels like just a lot of work to maybe get 2 spirit tokens, right? And those spirit tokens could be really big, but I don't think it's where you're going to want to be. I think all in all, there's a high chance that you'll get 1 or 2 experience counters, and then you might lose Daxos, and you're just going to be kind of sad about that. And you'll have to keep those experience counters. Hold on, I'm just writing a card that I think I should suggest, but then you're going to keep those experience counters for the rest of the game, thinking about what could have been. Let's see. Eidolon of Countless Battles is interesting. I'm going to be a little less harsh on it because it can grow very large in a deck like this. And Bestow does technically make it a 4 mana card because we can just bestow this onto onto any creature. I forgot about that. I forgot that Bestow you can pick any creature. It doesn't have to be your own. Yeah, this is very, very good. I do like this, and I'm just going to count it as a 4 mana card and move on. Let's go down to Helioid's Pilgrim. Helioid's Pilgrim is a tutor in 3 mana, and therefore I have no problem with it. This is exactly the 3 mana card we want, and I'm very happy to keep her here. Catilda is a little strange. She has really cool art here and a lot of different text. She kind of reminds me a lot of like old children, like old 3D programming when I was a kid. She looks like she's from Reboot, but she gives a lot of really interesting abilities with the bonus of auras. The bonus that says +1/+1 for each enchantment. Either she has it or on her backside as an aura she gives it. It's interesting. I'm going to say that I think this bears testing. She's kind of a weird creature. She at least is a 1/1 because she herself is a spirit, but I don't know how easily you can grow her. And I feel like she's just a weaker version of Countless Battles, but I'd say test it to go on, to see how it works. And Catilda's Rising Dawn, same kind of thing, but is an aura on the other side. I don't know if I'd pay 5 mana for the aura, but the idea of playing her, she dies, and then being able to return her as an aura is kind of interesting, but I don't think we can really put her into our graveyard ourselves, so I'm kind of medium on this card, but I would be interested to see it play. Lurrus is great here. Lurrus is very, very happily, you can just cast a majority of your enchantments from the graveyard with Lurrus out, perfect 3 mana spell. Mesa Enchantress, likewise, works really well in the deck. All right, wow, that took a while, but we've made it through the creatures. Let's quickly go through the rest of 3 mana cards just to see how we're feeling. Grim Tutor, I feel like we have enough 3 mana tutors with Idyllic Tutor. I wouldn't mind. We have Diabolic Tutor. I don't know. I don't see why this couldn't be Profane Tutor, for example, to just have it at 2 mana. I just don't love the fact it's at 3 mana. 3 mana is just a lot for something like this. And though tutors are really good in these kind of decks because they allow you to get the right aura instead of any aura, There is a point to say that Eriette works with a mass of auras, and at a certain point, I feel like card draw, like card advantage, is more important than card selection. So Grim Tutor kind of sticks out as being kind of tricky. Idyllic Tutor is just fine. I think you play one of these two. I know Grim Tutor is technically a little better in the sense that it gets any card, but I don't know how often you're going to want to get a creature about it. I guess the life loss doesn't matter. The 2 black can be difficult. These cards are really, really similar in my mind. You play one or the other. 7's Reclamation, really, really good. Toxic Deluge, really, really good. No problem here. Anguished Unmaking, we're going to instance. Anguished Unmaking and Generous Gift are almost the same card, and I would play one and not the other. And I think I'd rather play Generous Gift a lot. Last week, I don't know if Matt was in this conversation, but we were talking about this, of whether Generous Gift is good enough because it hits permanents, it hits lands in addition to every other type. Whereas other cards of this type often, like Anguished Unmaking, and I think there's a new one in the new set, I was told, but will hit everything but lands. And it depends on your play group, but I personally really like being able to hit lands. I think it's just, sometimes it's really, really relevant. Sometimes you can cut someone off of a color. I think it's a really important ability. I'll let you guys be the judge. But I think we only need one at 3 and not 2. Teferi's Protection is a fun card. I'm not going to say much about it. If it's the kind of card that's good in your play group, it's a really good card. If it's not, it's kind of a waste of a card. You will find your way out. All right, so looking down here, we're at the last part where we're going to look at the 3-mana enchantments before we do a quick look over the deck. And a lot of these are really good. Ghoulish Impetus is really, really interesting. I think this is a really cool card that they printed, and I really want to see it in action. It's just very, very strong. Minions Return feels strong, except for the fact that we have this ability at 2 mana, and so this feels like the extra one. I don't think the flash makes much of a difference, so I'm tempted to say this isn't good enough at 3 mana, but it is interesting. Mage Mark is really interesting. It has a very strange ability. It will protect your creature. It does a lot for what it does, but it also does very little for you, if that makes sense. So this is a 3 mana Kaya's Ghost form, where if your creature, and not even that, right? It's specifically if an enchanted creature dies and you control it, it returns to your hand instead. How often are you enchanting your own creatures? Not very, very often. So, and you can enchant it specifically with this card to get that effect, but I feel like it's just not exactly where you want to be. I will have a different suggestion for that. But also, the other text of creatures you control are enchanted, get +1/+1. I mean, you also don't want this because you're not enchanting your own creatures. This just feels like just okay and not great, so I don't particularly love it. Necromancy, very, very strong. I don't know if you're also playing Animate Dead, but you could probably do that as well. You are, yeah. Just some animation spells are really nice because, and I believe this hits your opponent's creatures. Yeah, just being able to get your opponent's creatures back is pretty nice. Pariah is fine, very good to enchant your opponent's creatures and basically get a fog. And if your opponent has a really big creature or an indestructible creature, you get so much benefit out of this card. I really do like it. Shielded by Fate, interesting. I don't think you cast this on your opponent's creatures, and so the second line of text that lets you flip this around isn't as cool because most likely you want to cast this on Eriette and leave it there. But once again, this is one of those abilities, like indestructibility isn't as good as it used to be. Like, a lot of our removal gets around it. We've got Path, we've got Swords, we've got Toxic Deluge, we have Sacrifice effects. So I wonder to what extent we prefer a protection spell where the creature gets protection from all colors, or how much we prefer just one of the reanimation spells instead. This is 1 white, it's kind of tricky, it's not that good otherwise, and you don't want to put it on your opponent's creatures. I'm kind of iffy on it. Timely Ward is the same thing, but it has flash against your commanders. I'm also not too interested in this card, but I see why this could be cool. Vow of Malice is fine. It kind of is bad though, right? It's honestly, it's just 2 and a black, +2/+2, and Intimidate, and that's it. Because the rest of the text is already given by your commander, so it's just a little redundant. So it sticks out as being kind of a weird card. I think I'd like the other Impetus instead than this. I think it's just a little stronger. This art is so strange to me. This would be really uncomfortable to have all these spikes out of you. You couldn't get anything done. So that's a little rough. And I didn't talk about this, but Duelist Heritage, I don't know how much I like it in this deck, but I'm not going to say anything because I'd like to see it being tested to find out how good it is. It's just, often it's a really strong political card, and kind of its strength also lies on how good your own deck is with it. And our deck isn't that good with it, right? We just don't represent really big double strikers. So because of that, this is a purely political card. It's not an aura. And if we want this effect, I think I'd like it on an aura more than I would like it on Duelist Heritage. That being said, because those creatures are going to be attacking your opponents, you'll have a lot of chances to trigger this. I just wonder how low on the scale it is, right? Because first you got to cast Eriette, then you have to have auras on the creature, and then you have to take a turn off or half a turn off to cast this. And yeah, it pays dividends if you get to trigger it over and over in a turn cycle, but you want to cast this after you're done casting all your auras, and I think that means it's a bad card in this deck. All right, really quickly, let's take a look at anything else that kind of jumps out at me as cards that I feel are interesting or strange inclusions. And I'm going to say most of it is very, very, very good here. There's a few things that I feel are missing, but I'll bring those up myself. I think one of the things that's missing, I will say now, is I feel like we are a little low on mana rocks. I'm going to bring this up again, but one of our problems, one of the ways we alleviate having so many 3-drops is by having mana rocks at 2 to kind of make it so our mana gets to 6 faster. Because once we're at 6, we can cast 2 3-mana spells or 3 2-mana spells, which are both things that this deck wants to do. So getting to 6 mana is kind of important, so I don't mind having 1 or 2 mana rocks more to kind of just make that a little more accessible. I also see, so we have Hallowed Haunting, we have Starfield of Nyx, and Sigil of the Empty Throne. And I feel like this is a bit much. These are all cards that kind of either turn our enchantments into creatures or create creatures as we play enchantments. And I think Sigil of the Empty Throne is really good here, but the other two kind of make me suspicious. Now, don't get me wrong, Starfield of Nyx is a card I really, really like. I've always wanted to play it. I think it's really strong because you get to keep that first part of the text is really, really good. But it's one of those cards where the second part of the text is actually really, really bad because it just opens all of your enchantments up to... Oh wait, it's not aura. Of course, because the enchantments would fall off if they were auras. Okay, that's fine. Does Sage's Reverie work, Hallowed Haunting work the right way? Right, because this creates... Okay, never mind. I've read the card and the card has been explained to me. I do like these selections, though. I'm still kind of thinking Hallowed Haunting or, Sigil of the Empty Throne. I don't know if I want both. And they do similar things. Hallowed Haunting is better when you have 4 or more spirit. Well, when you have more than 4 spirits, right? Because each spirit is the power and toughness of a spirit, and each angel is a 4/4. So you need 5 spirits for this to be stronger than Sigil of the Empty Throne. And do these have vigilance? They don't. They have flying. Yeah, it feels like the fact that the spirits don't even come with flying until you have 7 enchantments, I think I like Sigil of the Empty Throne a lot more than Hallowed Haunting. These are cards that kind of turn on your opponent's board clears as well, and I don't really love that. To put it in context, I think there's going to be situations where you have Eriette out, you've maybe one support enchantment creature, probably not Mesa Enchantress because that's going to get removed, but you have Eriette out, she's just doing her thing, she's vibing, and then your opponents have a bunch of creatures that you have auras on, and they're attacking each other, and they're taking a little damage every turn cycle because of these auras, these curses basically you've cast on them. So here's the problem. Right now, your opponents are losing health, but they have a board they want to keep. If they have board clears, they probably don't want to cast them because they're going to be too far behind. But when you cast Hallowed Haunting or Sigil of the Empty Throne, you are making it more attractive for them to wipe the board turn by turn because you are creating an army that is hard for them to deal with. By the end of that, they might just be in a situation where they're willing to just lose the creatures knowing that you're going to lose all your angels or all your spirits in addition to losing your commander and losing all of the auras attached to their creatures. Like, I think it just sets up a situation where the board clears become worth doing and you are going to lose the most from it, right? Because you can't reestablish a board quickly, and in fact, to a degree, you're kind of dependent on your opponents reestablishing their board in order to start cursing their creatures again. So I kind of want to, if at all possible, to make it so your opponents don't want to cast board clears against you specifically. So these cards kind of incentivize that, and I don't particularly like that. Okay, so those are the cards that kind of really, in this first draft, stick out at me. And now I'm going to talk about some additions that I would like to throw in. There's going to be no in particular order, but things I think are missing. And maybe it's because I used to play Hammer Time, but Sigarda's Aid is a card that I think could definitely go in this deck for free. Having your auras cast as flash speed is so good for 1 mana. This is the kind of ability that costs 4 or 5 mana in other colors, right? To make the majority of their deck flash. Sigarda's Aid makes the majority of your deck flash for 1 mana. This also allows you to auto-attach equipment, but I don't think that's the direction we're going in, so we don't have to worry about that text either. I think we're just so used to looking at this card and thinking about it equipping hammers that we forget that it gives our auras flash, which is really good here. Another card that I think is interesting is Ondu Spirit Dancer. I don't know how good this is. This is from the new set, so I haven't seen it around because of how expensive it is. But the fact that it makes a copy of the first enchantment you get per turn, remember it's enter the battlefield, not cast, is really interesting, right? When you create a copy of an aura, it's going to come in and attach it to any other target. And when auras come in and they're not cast, they supersede Shroud and Hexproof, for those who don't know this. Because you don't attach them, it's just put onto them. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Someone might correct me, but I'm fairly certain this is how, because I've seen it happen that if you return an aura from the graveyard to the battlefield, it can then immediately attach itself to something with Shroud. So I know there's ways to make this happen, but I'm not entirely sure if this one is one of them. But I think it is, and if so, this is a really cool support creature that I think is interesting. A few auras that I think weren't in here. Unquestioned Authority that gives protection from creatures and draws a card. It is 3 mana, but I think it is neat because protection from creatures makes it really good to put on your opponent's creatures and let them attack with impunity. And the fact it draws you a card on ETB is just a nice quality of life thing. Likewise, another quality of life ETB is Twisted Embrace, which destroys a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls on ETB, and it still functions as an aura. I know 4 mana is a lot for removal, but I think the fact that it's also an aura that you can enchant something with is really cool. The other thing is, the fact that you can enchant artifacts with this is interesting too. So if you don't really have any targets and you'd like to use this, and you'd like it to keep it to stay around through board clears, you can just throw this on someone's, Soul Ring or someone's Mana Rock. Yeah, you won't get the whole preventing creatures from attacking, but you'll still get the drain and you'll still get the destroy target creature. And I think that is a really interesting utility in this card. One more 4-mana black enchantment is Inner Demon. Once again, built for its ETB, and its ETB is that it gives -2/-2 to all non-demon creatures. This is a board clear. This does kill some of your creatures, so it should be used a little, carefully. But the fact that you can enchant one of your opponent's creatures, grow it, give it flying, force it, give it incentive to attack your other opponents while clearing the battlefield of small creatures, I think this has a really nice package of abilities. And from playing Elshnorn for so long, -2/-2 is really, really good. Now this isn't permanent, but even a one-time kind of -2/-2 will destroy a lot of creatures. All right, the next few cards I want to suggest are cards that reduce the mana cost of auras. This I've been alluding to. Another way I like that we kind of get around the 3-mana problem is that we're going to reduce the cost of our 3-mana spells, reduce them to 2, reduce our 2-mana spells to 1, etc., etc. I think we're pretty happy to do so. Transcendent Envoy is one of those cards. Now what's interesting is these kind of cards actually see very little play in regular Commander because most enchantment decks don't care for these because they specifically say aura. This means they're free for us to pick up, and we're going to be pretty happy to pick them up. So Transcendent Envoy gives one less to cast. It's a flying 1/2. Danitha Caption, who is unfortunately 3 mana, these next two are 3 mana, but has a really interesting collection of abilities, and is a card that's good when you're just playing with her, but also really, really good to put an aura on her. First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink are all just really good abilities to give just power to her. If you can give her +2/+2, she becomes a pretty good beater, a pretty good defender, and life gain. I do really like that, but generally just reduces the cost is nice. And once again, if you want a similar ability, Strandheim Courser does this as well. Once again, a 3 mana, which is unfortunate, but does reduce your enchantment spells by 1. All right, so those are cards that I think could be interesting here. There's a certain kind of ceiling for them. If you ask me, I'd probably play Transcendent Envoy for sure, and then think about playing the other two, because it's not one of those decks where you have all of them out and all of a sudden, wow, you can cast all of these spells forever for basically free. A lot of our spells are low mana. So after, the majority of them, if we look, at least we have all the ones that are just 1 mana, then we have a bunch of 2 mana, and the fall off rate for reduction of the mana cost is really, really quick. So I don't know if we're going to want to have a critical mass of them. We just want 1 or 2. All right, cards that I think could really easily go in here, Mother of Runes and Giver of Runes. Both of these are just kind of protection for Eriette. Eriette is very, very good in our deck and very essential to keep out. And one of the things that makes her a little tricky is if we're going to use auras to protect her, well, they have to come in after she's in play. But both the Giver and Mother of Runes will protect her before she comes in play. You run these out, and then once Eriette comes into play, these creatures don't have summoning sickness, and from that moment on, you can protect her really easily. I do like them. I would probably play one, maybe not both, but they're worth considering. All right, a card that this should be earlier in the list, but Sarah Paragon. If you like Lurrus, you should be playing Sarah Paragon. Sarah Paragon is 1 mana more, which is unfortunate, but pushes it out of the 3 mana slot. It brings back any 3 mana or less a card, as in you can cast a 3 mana or less card from your graveyard. And that's the sweet spot of the deck, so that's really, really good. And The whole once you do, it will be exiled the next time. That's fine. You don't care too much about it. You're probably not even with Lurrus, you're not infinitely recurring the same enchantments over and over again. So losing enchantments here and there is pretty fine. Both Lurrus and Sarah allow you to only cast one card per turn. I needed to check that, but yeah. I'm a little worried where I was like, oh no, did I forget how Lurrus worked and he's even more, or she's even more broken than I thought she was? But no. So when you have both of them out, their abilities stack really well, where you get 2 spells from your graveyard. All in all, this should definitely be in the deck. I think it's very, very strong. Speaking of graveyard recursion, one of my favorite cards, Unearth. If you are in black and your commander is less than 4 mana, you should play Unearth 100% of the time, because this represents if you have Unearth, you can just let your commander go to the graveyard and unearth her for 1 mana instead of 5. Caveat: if your opponents have Counterspell and they counter that Unearth, you're going to be sad. So be careful when you use this. However, Unearth is also just generally good here because you can get back Lurrus, you can get back a number of your very powerful creatures. And as always, and one of my favorite things about Unearth is that if it's bad, you just cycle it away. It's not bad at all. 2 mana to get a new card is a great rate when this card does so much by itself. All right, I have 5 final cards and then we will wrap this up. These are just generic good black-white cards that I think will slot really, really easily in a deck like this, but do bring up the cost a little bit. I know the kind of decks Matt plays, so I don't feel too bad suggesting these cards, but for people who are watching and might be wanting to make a lower budget or a lower power level, you might want to think about these cards a little bit. Esper Sentinel is just really, really good in a deck like this. Card draw is really important, and this is kind of soft card draw for a few turns before it gets removed, but your deck is already built to protect creatures like Esper Sentinel, and so it's gonna be really easy to protect him and recur him, and every removal spell that hits the Sentinel doesn't hit Eriette. So you're really, really happy. This is just a very strong card here. Likewise, in a similar vein, Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff, is really, really good for the exact same reasons, but instead of drawing you cards, this card will make treasure tokens for you. And you don't ever need to worry about the life loss because life gain is stapled on your commander. A very nice inclusion. One more in the same vein is Dark Confidant. Another great card draw spell. You're just going to be very, very happy. You're going to get a bunch of cards, and card draw just allows you to play more auras and then start ballooning outwards and being able to take out your opponents in just a few less turns. Because the difference of draining 5 a turn to draining 7 a turn is huge, and you're going to be really happy that you play something like this. All right, and these last 2 cards aren't expensive. I said that earlier, but these 2 don't fall in that category, and I just feel like you should be playing Sign in Blood for just a little more card draw, and Path to Exile for a little more removal. I heard recently people talking about whether Path to Exile is stronger or weaker than Swords to Plowshares. I want none of that conversation. You should be playing both, is my answer. All right, we are almost at 45 minutes, so I think I'm going to close this video off with I am really, really excited to play Eriette. I think she looks like a lot of fun. This is a different kind of cursing. I know when we say curse is its own card type, but I guess I mean hexing. This is kind of like a hex commander where you're just hexing your opponent's creatures, making them worse, and benefiting from it. This is exactly the kind of commander and play style I really, really like. So there's like this really high possibility that Matt and I will build the exact same deck, and we have the same play group, so that might be a bit of a problem. So maybe I'll ask him if I can borrow his deck every now and then, but that doesn't sit well with me. I want to build this as well, so maybe I'll let him play test it, see if it's fun, and then I'll build mine. All right, I hope this deck assist video was helpful to you, and if you've got another draft of this deck, because it is a first draft, I'd love to see it. there is a link in the video description where you can send any draft of a deck to me and I can take a look at it. And if you would like your draft to be, or your deck to be the next deck I look at, I've got a really big collection of decks to go through. There is a link in the description to bring your deck to the front of the queue. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I'm trying to put a little more effort in these videos going forward, and if you're impressed, you should put a comment saying, hey, Cursed Deck Builder, this is amazing, you're the best. I would very much appreciate that. All right, good luck.